Officer, I haven't committed a crime. This is an unlawful detention.
You don't get to decide that.
No, you fit the profile of an officer about to end his career.
Turn around. Last warning. You're on camera. Every second of this is on. The high-def lens of the park security camera caught the entire scene in stark, unforgiving clarity.
Kelly Jones stood in his kitchen, the early morning light hitting the counter in a sharp, clean line. He opened the top drawer of the side table, the one that usually stayed locked. Resting inside was a leather wallet, worn at the edges from 20 years of being pulled in and out of a pocket. Inside that wallet sat a gold shield that had once opened every door in the city. He looked at it for a long moment, the weight of the metal familiar, even without touching it. It represented 4 decades of radio calls, high-speed chases, and the heavy silence of late-night paperwork. He reached out, his thumb tracing the engraved title of chief, but then he stopped. He closed his eyes and took a breath. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to be the man with the answers. He didn't have to worry about precinct budgets, city council meetings, or the mounting crime stats in the 4th District. Today, he was just a man with a free afternoon and a need for some fresh air. His story isn't about violence. It's about the moment power changes hands. Kindly hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and tell me where you are watching from to get more videos. He pulled his hand back and slid the drawer shut. The click of a latch sounded like a final period at the end of a very long sentence. He grabbed a gray, fleece-lined hooded jacket from the hook by the door. It was nondescript, the kind of clothing that made a man disappear into a crowd. He checked his back pocket for his regular wallet, the one with only a driver's license and a few $20 bills, and stepped out onto his porch. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp with the smell of wet pavement and blooming spring flowers. He started walking toward the park, enjoying the fact that he wasn't checking the alleyways for shadows or listening for the distant wail of a siren. He felt lighter, his shoulders dropping an inch for every block he put between himself and the house filled with his career memories. He was heading for the bench by the tulips, a spot he'd seen from a patrol car window 1,000 times but never actually sat in. Today, the only authority he wanted to answer to was his own watch. Officer Scott Taylor leaned his elbow against the door frame of his cruiser, his eyes scanning the park with a restless, predatory energy. He wasn't looking for help to give or a community to protect. He was looking for a reason to act. To Taylor, the vibrant tulips and the families on the grass were just a backdrop for potential elements that didn't belong. He adjusted his duty belt, feeling the familiar weight of his gear, and slowed the car to a crawl as he neared the north floral beds. That's when he saw him. Kelly Jones was sitting on a bench, perfectly still. He wasn't looking at a phone, he wasn't reading a book, and he wasn't moving. To anyone else, it was a man enjoying a quiet morning. To Taylor, that level of stillness looked like a challenge. It looked like someone who was too comfortable, someone who didn't tighten up or look away when a black and white cruiser rolled by. Taylor watched him through the windshield, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Look at this guy," Taylor muttered to the empty car. He didn't like the way the man's gray hood was up, or the way he seemed to be staring at nothing. In Taylor's mind, if you weren't doing something, you were up to something. He saw the man's calm demeanor as a lack of respect for his presence. Most people adjusted their posture or checked their speed when Taylor was around, but this man didn't even blink. Taylor pulled the cruiser over to the curb, the tires kicking up a small cloud of dust. He didn't put on his lights yet. He wanted to see if the man would bolt. When Kelly stayed exactly where he was, Taylor felt a surge of irritation. He decided right then that he was going to shake him up. He wanted to see that moment of panic in the man's eyes, the frantic search for an ID, the stuttering excuses. He needed to remind the man who actually owned the sidewalk. He opened the door and stepped out, the heavy soles of his boots hitting the pavement with intentional force. He didn't approach from the front. He cut across the grass to come in from an angle, trying to catch the man off guard. He kept his hand near his holster, not because there's a threat, but because he liked the way it made him look in the reflection of the park's pond. He was a hunter on a trail, and as far as he was concerned, the man on the bench was already caught. Officer Scott Taylor stopped 3 feet from the bench, legs braced in a wide stance, his shadow stretching over Kelly's lap. He didn't offer a greeting. He just stared down at the man in the gray parka, waiting for the flicker of nerves that usually came when a uniform closed in. Kelly didn't give it to him. He didn't even look up. Immediately, he finished watching a blue jay land on a nearby branch before slowly turning his head toward the officer. "Can I help you, officer?" Kelly asked. His voice was level, projecting a confidence that Taylor found deeply irritating. Taylor hooked his thumbs into his tactical vest. "I'll be the one asking the questions. Why are you hanging around here? You've been on this bench long enough to see the grass grow." Kelly adjusted his posture slightly, leaning back against the wood. "I'm enjoying the morning. It's a public park, isn't it?" "Public doesn't mean you get to set up camp," Taylor snapped, his hand shifting to his belt. "We've had calls about people loitering, making families in this area uncomfortable. You don't exactly look like you're out for a jog. I need to see some ID." Kelly's expression didn't change. He knew the law better than the man standing over him. "I'm not setting up camp, officer. I'm sitting on a bench. And under the current municipal code, a citizen isn't required to produce identification unless they are being detained under suspicion of a specific articulable crime. Am I being detained?" Taylor stiffened. He hated curbside lawyers. He stepped closer, entering Kelly's personal space to force him to look up at a steeper angle. "I'm conducting a field interview. You're being uncooperative. Now, are you going to give me your name, or are we going to do this the hard way?" "There is no hard way for sitting in a park," Kelly replied, his tone remaining frustratingly calm. "I haven't broken any laws, and I'm not carrying anything illegal. I'm just a resident taking a break. If you have a legitimate reason to hold me, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I'd like to get back to my morning." Taylor felt his face heat up. The calm, legal precision of the answers felt like a slap. He had expected a stutter or a plea, but instead, he was being handled with the cool efficiency of a professional. To Taylor, this wasn't a citizen exercising rights, it was a subordinate talking back. He clicked the mic on his shoulder, his eyes locked on Kelly's. "Dispatch, I've got a 10 to 95, subject is being noncompliant. Send another unit to the north flower beds." Kelly sighed, a soft sound of genuine disappointment. He saw the path Taylor was choosing, and he knew there was no turning back now. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't exist, Officer Taylor," Kelly said, reading the name tag. "Think very carefully about what you do next." Officer Scott Taylor leaned in, his voice dropping into a low, practiced growl intended to rattle anyone on the receiving end. "You want to play the lawyer card? Fine. Let's talk about reasonable suspicion. We've had calls about a man matching your exact description, gray hoodie, dark shirt, acting erratically and harassing people by the flower beds. You're a match, which gives me every right to detain you until I figure out who you are." Kelly didn't flinch. He didn't shift his weight or look away. He had spent years listening to officers try to bridge the gap when they didn't have a solid reason for a stop. He knew exactly what a vague description sounded like, and he knew Taylor was making it up on the fly. Matching a description isn't a crime, especially when the description is as generic as a gray jacket in a public park, Kelly said. He kept his eyes locked on Taylor's. If there were actual calls, there would be a record. What's the CAD event number for those reports? Or better yet, give me the dispatch log time. I've been sitting here since 8:15. If a call came in, I would have heard your radio chirp long before you pulled up. Taylor's jaw tightened. The mention of a CAD number, the computer-aided dispatch log, hit him like a cold bucket of water. Random civilians didn't know that term. They usually argued about their rights or yelled about their taxes paying his salary. They didn't ask for specific administrative tracking numbers. "I don't have to give you a log number," Taylor barked, trying to regain the high ground. "I'm telling you, there's an investigation. You're being detained for questioning. Now, stand up and turn around." "You're digging a hole, officer," Kelly replied, his voice still low and terrifyingly calm. "We both know there are no calls. We both know you saw a man you didn't think belonged here, and you decided to push. If you proceed with a detention based on a fabricated report, you aren't just violating my rights, you're committing official misconduct. Is that really how you want your shift to go?" The confrontation had drawn a small crowd. A few joggers had slowed down, and a woman with a stroller was watching from 10 feet away, her phone already out. Taylor felt the heat of the spotlight and doubled down. He couldn't back away, now, without looking weak, in front of the public. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt, the metal clicking loudly in the quiet park air. "I'm done talking," Taylor said. "Stand up. Now." Kelly looked at the handcuffs, then back at Taylor's face. He saw the pride and the adrenaline overriding any sense of professional judgment. It was a failure of the system he had worked so hard to build. "I'll stand," Kelly said. "But remember this moment, Scott. You were given every chance to do the right thing." Taylor grabbed Kelly's shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric of the gray parka. "Stand up. Now," he barked, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of the growing crowd. Kelly stood slowly, maintaining a calm that seemed to infuriate the officer even more. He didn't pull away or tense up, but the mere act of Kelly standing at his full height, matching Taylor inch for inch, was enough for the officer to perceive a threat where there wasn't one. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Taylor ordered, stepping behind him. As he reached for Kelly's right wrist, he gave a sharp, unnecessary shove toward the park bench. "Stop resisting," Taylor yelled, though Kelly hadn't moved a muscle. It was a tactical phrase, a verbal placeholder used to justify force on a body camera recording, and Kelly knew it. He felt the cold, heavy bite of the first cuff ratcheting shut against his skin. Taylor didn't just lock it. He tightened it past the point of necessity, a final petty jab to assert dominance. A few yards away, a man in a jogging suit stopped and pulled out his phone. "What are you arresting him for?" the bystander called out. He was just sitting there. Taylor didn't look back. "Back up, sir. Police business. If you interfere, you'll be next for obstruction." His breath was coming in short, jagged bursts now. The adrenaline was high, and he was fully committed to the mistake. He grabbed Kelly's other hand, forcing it up high between his shoulder blades to cause a sharp twinge of pain, trying to elicit a flinch or a shout that he could call combative behavior. Kelly remained silent. He didn't give Taylor the satisfaction of a groan. He simply looked at the grass, watching a ladybug crawl near the base of a tulip. He felt the eyes of the park-goers, the parents, the students, the retirees, and he felt a profound sense of shame, not for himself, but for the uniform Taylor was wearing. "I'm taking you in for loitering, failure to identify, and resisting an officer," Taylor muttered as he clicked the second cuff into place. He began to march Kelly toward the cruiser parked on the grass, his hand firmly on the back of Kelly's neck. "You've crossed a line today, Scott," Kelly said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chatter of the crowd. "There's no coming back from a false arrest. Keep talking, and I'll add a charge for threatening a public official," Taylor snapped, shoving Kelly toward the rear door of the patrol car. He reached for the handle, his face flushed with a triumphant, misplaced sense of victory. He didn't hear the second siren until it was already turning the corner onto the park's walking path. The second patrol car didn't just pull up, it skidded to a halt on the grass, the tires kicking up clumps of turf and dirt. Officer Scott, Taylor didn't turn around immediately. He kept his weight pressed against Kelly Jones's back, pinning him against the warm metal of the cruiser's trunk. He wanted the arriving units to see him in total control. He wanted them to see that he had successfully tamed a defiant subject. "Over here!" Taylor shouted, waving a hand toward the new arrivals without letting go of Kelly's arm. "I've got him under control." Subject was being non-compliant, refused ID, and resisted. Sergeant Hollis climbed out of the driver's side, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Officer Sterling followed from the passenger side, already reaching for his radio to report their arrival. Taylor had a smug grin plastered on his face, expecting a good job or a hand on the shoulder for his proactive work. Instead, he saw Hollis's face go from professional focus to absolute bloodless shock. Hollis didn't even look at Taylor. His eyes were locked on the man in the gray parka. He stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth hanging slightly open. "Taylor, get your hands off him," Hollis said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was trembling with a mix of fury and fear. Taylor chuckled, confused. "Sarge, I'm telling you, this guy was—" "I said get your hands off him now." Hollis roared, lunging forward. He didn't wait for Taylor to comply. He shoved Taylor's hands away from Kelly's shoulders with such force that the younger officer stumbled back 3 steps. Sterling, who had just caught a clear look at Kelly's face as the hood shifted, let out a sharp, audible gasp. "Oh no. Oh, God, Taylor." Taylor looked between his 2 colleagues, his confusion turning into a slow, cold knot in his stomach. "What's the problem?" "It's just a loiterer. He wouldn't give me a name." Hollis ignored him. He was already fumbling with his belt, pulling out his cuff key with shaking fingers. He stepped toward Kelly, his posture shifting from an officer in charge to a subordinate in deep trouble. "Chief," Hollis whispered, the word carrying enough weight to make the air in the park feel heavy. "Chief Jones, I am so sorry. We didn't know you were back in the city. I can't apologize enough." The click of the handcuffs being unlocked was the only sound in the park. The crowd of bystanders had gone silent. Taylor felt the world tilting. He looked at the man he had just shoved, the man he had called a loiterer, and then he looked at the name on the bronze plaque of the police memorial just 50 yards away. The initials were the same. The face was older, but the eyes were unmistakable. Kelly Jones didn't move. He didn't rub his wrists or walk away. He just stood there, letting the silence eat away at Taylor's confidence. He looked at Hollis, then shifted his gaze to Taylor, who was now standing as still as a statue, his face turning a sickly shade of white. "It's been a long time, Hollis," Kelly said. His voice was calm, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "Is this what the department is teaching these days?" Sergeant Hollis gripped the edge of the cruiser's door, his knuckles turning white as he stared at Officer Taylor. The younger officer was frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking between his supervisor and the man he had just treated like a criminal. The smugness that had defined Taylor's face for the last 20 minutes had vanished, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization. "Do you have any idea who you're looking at, Scott?" Hollis's voice was low, vibrating with a mix of exhaustion and genuine dread. Taylor swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. You said chief. I thought maybe from another county." "Not another county," Hollis snapped, stepping closer until he was inches from Taylor's chest. "This is Kelly Jones. He didn't just work here. He built this place. 10 years ago, when this department was falling apart from the inside, he was the one who stepped in. He's the reason we have a community outreach program. He's the reason this precinct isn't a war zone. He integrated the specialized units and cut the violent crime rate by 40% in a single term. He's the man who wrote the training manual you clearly haven't bothered to read." The crowd in the park had moved closer, sensing the total collapse of Taylor's authority. Taylor looked at Kelly, who was calmly adjusting the sleeves of his gray jacket. The handcuffs were gone, but the red marks on Kelly's wrists were visible, a physical record of Taylor's aggression. "He was just sitting there, Sarge," Taylor stammered, his eyes darting around. "I thought he wouldn't show ID. I thought he was a loiterer." "A loiterer?" Hollis let out a short, bitter laugh. "He was a precinct commander when you were still in middle school. He's lived in this neighborhood longer than you've been on the force. You didn't see a loiterer, Taylor. You saw a target." Kelly finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension with a quiet, surgical precision. "I told you that you were making a mistake, officer. I told you that there were no calls for service at this location. You chose to manufacture a reason to detain me because you didn't like the way I looked at you." Taylor looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. The professional consequences were starting to dawn on him. The internal affairs investigation, the loss of his shield, the potential lawsuit. But the immediate weight was heavier. He had just humiliated the most respected figure in the history of the department in front of a dozen witnesses with cell phones. "Hollis," Kelly said, turning his attention to the sergeant. "I want his body camera footage pulled and flagged. I want the dispatch logs for this morning reviewed by the captain. If there's a man matching my description in the system, I want to see the timestamp. But we both know there isn't one." Hollis nodded, his head down. "Consider it done. Chief, I'll personally escort him back to the station." Kelly looked at Taylor one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. You have the gear, Taylor. You have the badge. But you don't have the first clue what it means to be a peace officer. Kelly Jones didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood in the center of the path, the red marks from the handcuffs still fading on his wrists, and looked directly at Officer Taylor. The younger man was shaking now, his hands hovering uselessly near his belt, his eyes fixed on the ground. Sergeant Hollis and Officer Sterling stood back, giving Kelly the floor as if they were back in a precinct briefing room. "Look at me, Scott," Kelly said. It wasn't a request. It was an order that carried 40 years of weight. Taylor slowly lifted his head, his face pale and eyes glassed over with the realization that his career was likely ending. "I'm not going to ask for your badge," Kelly began, his voice cutting through the park's quiet like a blade. Taylor's eyes widened in brief hope, but Kelly continued before the man could exhale. "Firing you is easy. It gets rid of the symptom, but it doesn't fix the disease. You think that because the city gave you a gun, a piece of tin, and the right to use force, you have power. You don't. You have authority, and there is a massive difference between the two." Kelly took a step closer, forcing Taylor to maintain eye contact. "Power is what you just tried to use on me. It's the ability to shove a man against a car because you don't like his attitude. It's the ability to lie about a dispatch call because your ego felt bruised. Power is cheap. Any bully with a weapon has power. But authority? Authority is earned. It's the respect the people in this park give you because they trust your judgment. It's the restraint you show when you have every tool to escalate but choose to listen instead." He gestured to the bystanders who were still filming. "Those people aren't recording you because they hate the police. They're recording you because you're a stranger in their neighborhood using power you haven't earned. You walked up here as a predator looking for a win. A real officer walks up as a guardian looking for a way to keep the peace." Kelly turned to Sergeant Hollis. "Don't fire him yet, Hollis. Put him on administrative leave. Strip him of his patrol duties and put him in the archives. I want him to spend 40 hours a week reading the history of the civilian complaints in this city. I want him to see the names of the people whose lives were ruined by shaking them up. Then I want him to go through the de-escalation training again, the real one, not the version where you just check the boxes." He looked back at Taylor, his gaze unwavering. "If you come out the other side and you still think a badge is a license to be a bully, then you hand it in yourself. Because the next time you do this to a man who isn't a former chief, a man who doesn't know the CAD codes or his rights, you won't just be ruining his morning. You'll be destroying the very thing this uniform is supposed to protect." Taylor didn't speak. He couldn't. He just nodded, a small, jerky movement of his head. Kelly turned his back on him, the lecture over. He didn't need a formal apology. He needed the lesson to stick. Kelly Jones watched as Sergeant Hollis led a shell-shocked Officer Taylor back to the squad car. There were no more shouts, no more metallic clicks of handcuffs, just the low, rhythmic hum of the city resuming its pace. The crowd of onlookers slowly dispersed, tucking their phones into their pockets, their whispers fading as they moved back to their own lives. Sterling lingered for a second, offering a final, respectful nod that Kelly acknowledged with a tired blink before the second cruiser pulled away, tires crunching softly over the gravel. The silence that followed was different than the one before the encounter. It was heavier, earned through a confrontation that never should have happened. Kelly stood still for a moment, letting the adrenaline finally leave his system. His wrists ached where the steel had bitten in, but he didn't rub them. He just took a deep, steadying breath of the cooling afternoon air. He walked back to the wooden bench and sat down. The tulips in front of him remained bright and unbothered, their petals catching the shifting light as the sun moved behind a cloud. He reached into the pocket of his gray jacket and found the small bag of birdseed he'd bought earlier. He hadn't come here to be a chief or a legend or a lesson. He had come here to be a man in a park. As he tossed a handful of seeds onto the pavement, a few sparrows fluttered down from the trees. They didn't care about his history or the power he had once wielded. They didn't care about the gold shield sitting in a locked drawer at home. To them, he was just a source of kindness, a steady presence in a chaotic world. Kelly realized then that his authority didn't come from the title he'd held for decades. It didn't come from the ability to command a room or dictate policy. It came from the fact that he could sit on this bench, even after being humiliated and threatened, and still feel at home in his own skin. He had protected this city for 40 years, but in this moment, he realized the city was finally returning the favor. He was no longer the man in charge of the peace, he was finally a man at peace. He leaned back against the slats of the bench, watching the birds scatter and return. The park was quiet again. He closed his eyes, felt the sun on his face, and let the morning go.